over the years, as I've researched about Appalachia for writing on The Blind Pig and the Acorn, my blog, there's so many things that I come across that I wish I knew more about. Processes and methods that they used in days gone by. But one of the main things that I wish I knew more about, not just so that because I'm interested in the old ways, which I am, but also that I think I could use in my modern day lives. There's so many of those things that fit perfectly in our modern day lives. But one thing that I've always wished I knew more about was medicinal remedies. Now, I grew up with some of the most common ones, but nothing really, I mean, there was no like granny woman or yarb lady or yarb woman like you'll hear people call her, herb lady. There was nothing like that in my family. I wish there was. Some of the remedies like that I've been familiar with, like using jewelweed for poison oak or really yellow root. Pap did that for me one time when I had mouth ulcers. So I'm sure there's a few more, but there was nobody that really had lots of information about everything. Of course, I've read stories and I've heard other friends and family members say, well, when I was young, they did this to me or that. But I wish I knew more about the real remedies. Well, today we're going to talk about them, or I'm going to read to you about them. So several years ago, actually I know exactly when because I wrote in the corner of it, in 2004, Matt and I for Christmas got Granny these books, Recipes, Remedies, and Rumors. And it's Cades Cove, put out by the Cades Cove Preservation Association. So there's 2 books of it. It's not really 2 volumes. It says volume 1 and volume 2, but they go together. Like the contents in the back, I think the book goes all the way through almost 600 pages, but it's like one book. The first book goes to like 300, and then the rest of those pages are in the second book. So it's really, there's 2 volumes of it, but they're really one volume when you think about the pages in it. Anyway, so that's when we got Granny these back then. Well, probably, I don't know, in 2015, something like that, Pap fell and broke his hip. And it all turned out okay. He was all right and all that. But in the process of that, he had to come back home with a walker. Well, that Granny's house, like a lot of people, we let our houses over the years, you accumulate stuff. And so we had to rearrange a lot of stuff for that walker to fit through the house. When we were going through some of her stuff, she would say, why don't you take that home? Why don't you take that home? Well, this was one of the things. She said, I've never used those cookbooks. And I know she hadn't because they were in a back room. They wasn't even in the kitchen. Anyway, so I ended up with them. Well, they're really great cookbooks. And I'll put the link down below so that you could go, I think they still sell them, so you can go check out their website. They've got lots of great recipes in them, but they've got other stuff too, like remedies, where people shared the ones that were used in their family. So today we're going to talk about some of them. In the beginning though, at the very beginning of the book, they've got a little kind of where they go over the recipes, remedies, and rumors, what that means. So we're going to read the part about the remedies. A remedy is something that cures or relieves a disease or bodily disorder. The pioneers of Cades Cove and other communities could not rely on physicians, hospitals, or pharmacies to ease pain, cure disease, and assure longevity. Survival directly correlated with lifestyle, behavior, ingenuity, industry, and the ability to establish effective home or community treatment of illnesses and injuries, both mental and physical. Frequently, a rock-solid religious foundation and belief in the power of prayer and God was remedy enough for many needs. Occasionally, a little toddy incorporating white lightning was prescribed. This remedy was probably perceived as most effective in larger doses, but normally was not sufficient for permanent cures. Effective early remedies integrated the dependency on God with knowledge of nature's medicines, transported over the mountain ranges. The roots and leaves of plants, the bark and fruits of trees, and the love of families and neighbors were the primary remedies employed. Too many times these remedies were insufficient to meet the challenges of typhoid, cholera, and other nightmares which crept into the pioneer communities. Later, doctors brought advances in medical science into the community, and life expectancy slowly began to increase. In many situations, nature's remedies continued to be as effective as store-bought and were employed throughout the life of the community. Selected remedies are included to recognize the absolute requirements of our ancestors to develop and administer effective cures using the available medicines and knowledge of the time. Our existence today is evidence that our ancestors did succeed in this endeavor. So that's the introduction to the remedies part of these cookbooks. The people that put it together kind of wrote that little piece so that you could kind of see where they were coming from. They're by no means medical doctors, nor am I, but it's just interesting to look back at these remedies and to see which ones maybe that someone in your family used or someone in my family used, or to hear how they dealt with illnesses in those days. So we're going to start, let's start with one that I would hear a lot about is liniment. So if you ever hear liniment, my grandmother would always give me liniment, or they would rub liniment on me. So, but I've found over the years researching and looking, liniment meant a whole lot of different things to people. So this one is actually a recipe from Rhoda Lawson Abbott. So this was from 1912. This is a really old one. So she says that you put 1/2 pint coal oil. See, I don't even know what coal oil is, but maybe you do. I wonder if is that like lamp oil, maybe the same thing. 1 gill of turpentine. So I'm not sure what a gill is either. 1 gill hartshorn. 1 cent's worth morphine. I guess that was in the days that you could buy morphine over the counter. 1 gill hog's lard. The whites of 2 eggs, and 2 cents worth of camphor gum. So it says Rhoda Lawson Abbott was the mother of 10 children. She gathered herbs and made her own medicines. That's really fascinating. That's really interesting. So I don't know, but I just love thinking about it though. And of course these medicinal remedies were not relegated to Appalachia. People that lived all over the world had to figure out how to take care of themselves, how to doctor themselves. So these were common in other areas as well. That one's really interesting though. So let's see what the next one is. These remedies have been handed down through the Anthonys and the Schuler families. So an earache, pour warm sweet oil in the ear. I've actually used that one when I was little and I had an earache. Someone did that for me. I've also read remedies where they say pour a warm like sewing machine or machine oil in your ear, because after all your body's a machine, right? So of course there's the ones that advise pouring warm urine in your ear. I've read those before too. This is another one from the book though. Put a green persimmon stick on the fire, catch the juice that runs out the end, put it in a spoon and allow to cool to lukewarm, drop into the ear that hurts. So I've never had that one done to me, but Pap told me when he was a little boy, a real little boy, he was born on the Hawshaw Farm here in Cherokee County. His parents were sharecroppers there, and that's where he was born. And he could remember when they still lived there, and he would have been really little, maybe 3 years old, that he had an earache, and he could remember him getting some kind of little sticks. He did not think it was persimmon. He thought it was sassafras, but I'm not sure, and he wasn't sure. And they cut the little sticks and did just what the book says. They put them by the fire until the sap began to run out of them, and then they caught that sap and they put that in his ear. He couldn't really remember if it helped or if it didn't help, but he remembered them doing that. So for a bad cold, put onions in a skillet on the fire and cook until tender. Put in a small cloth sack and wrap so they would not burn the patient, and lay on his or her chest. While one was on the patient, they would be making another one so that they could rotate them, keeping a warm one on the patient. That one's pretty common. I've never done that or had anyone do that to me or seen it even anybody do it. But that one is listed so many times in so many different remedies that surely there has to be something to it. It has to work. So a fever with a cold, if you have a cold and you have a fever too, wrap patient in quilts and blankets and give a cup of hot ginger tea. That will break the fever. It's funny about the fevers. When I was growing up and somebody had a fever, me or Paul or Steve, if we were sick, Granny let us cover up with covers, and because you freeze. Then I've heard other families that said you could never cover up because they believed that you should you just shouldn't, that you need to let the fever run its course. And I was like, man, that's different. I never heard that. But so just like with everything else, there's varying different remedies for people to read and how they do things in their family. So let's see if we can find another one. Oh, I like this one a lot. So this is bug bites. This is about bug bites, this is the time of the year for bug bites for sure, summertime. When Sarah married into the Cades Cove Gregory's 31 years ago, so Gregory family in Cades Cove. Her father-in-law, Roy E. Gregory, would readily have available his home remedy for skeeter bites. As our children played along the Cable Mill Run or visited ancestral graves in the primitive Baptist cemetery, that remedy was tobacco. As soon as the children got a bug bite, Mr. Gregory broke off a wad of well-chewed tobacco from his jaw and placed it over the affected area, thus alleviating the pain and swelled up areas, and that was submitted by Sarah Saltz Gregory. So that one is really common, and I've heard and seen that, not just with, I hadn't really seen it with bug bites, but with bee stings. Matt has a great story of when he was little, he got into a nest and they held him down and they put tobacco, whichever one, I don't remember if it was his papa that was chewing tobacco or maybe one of his uncles. And they held him down and put tobacco spit all over him. So that one's really common, and I've seen that one myself, seen other people administer that one. So the next one, these remedies, it says old-time remedies for aches, pains, and whatever ails you. So these are some of the remedies my grandmother used on me when I was growing up at home. My grandmother was Mary Gamilla Shields Thompson, born and raised in Cades Cove by her parents, Andrew Jackson and Vina Adeline Carriel Shields. I'm sure that these are remedies her mother taught her. I don't know if they all worked, but I got better, and I was careful not to complain too much because I knew the bitter and sweet medicine was sure to follow. So for an earache, blow smoke into ears and plug with a piece of cotton. I've also heard that one a lot. So if you let, not as many people smoke today, but if you in the days when more people smoked, they would blow smoke into your ears, and that was going to help your earache. A few drops of warm sweet oil, so that was the one we'd already read before from another family. Strike a match and hold under the spoon. Warm ashes from the fireplace put in a clean cloth and held on the ear. So that's kind of like, I've not done that of course, but when I had an earache, I have like laid on a hot water bottle. So that makes sense if the ashes were warm. Ulcers in the mouth, golden seal root, ground to a powder and put directly on the sore. It sure did hurt, but it cured the ulcer. So that is my one experience with a medicinal remedy. One of the very few that I have is that yellow root instead of golden seal. And I think in certain places those names are kind of switched, so she may have been talking about yellow root or she may have been talking about golden seal. But when I was about to be married, me and Matt were about going to get married, the date was said, it's just a few days before the wedding, maybe a week. In those days I would get really bad mouth ulcers. I don't get them any longer, but growing up, me and Paul and Steve all did. And anyway, I had them so bad that I was afraid that on my wedding day I wouldn't even be able to say I do. When you would have them like that, I'd go around like talking like this, so I didn't have to move my lips much. Anyway, but Pap went to the creek and got me some yellow root, and you can make a tea out of it, but instead of doing that, I just chewed on it, and it was terrible. It was so bitter, but it did seem to help. It really did seem to help. So you could also use yellow root for ulcers in the mouth. Colds, flu, congestion, and or coughs. Vicks salve rubbed on the chest, covered with a clean flannel cloth. Put Vicks with lard in a can on top of the coal heater or cook stove and let melt, and put your head over it and drape a cloth over your head and can breathe in the vapors. So Vicks vapor rub was very common when I was growing up. I can still, that's one of those smells you smell and you're instantly took back to childhood. I've read where some people believe you should put it on the bottoms of your feet, like children's feet when they're congested. Of course, put it on your cold, but that's one of those smells that really takes me back to being a small child. Stings or bites, put chewing tobacco juice, wet snuff, baking soda, or meat tenderizer on the sting. Grease chest or sore muscle with Bengay and cover with a cloth and keep warm. Stay in bed with a cold and cover with lots of quilts, feather bed, and sweat it out. So they also believed in sweating it out. Poultices made of different plant leaves or herbs, sometimes mustard and baked onions, were put on the chest. A mixture of camphor and lard grease on the chest. Spoonful of sugar with a few drops of coal oil, and then it says in parentheses kerosene. So there's the answer to my question at the first recipe about coal oil. Cough syrup, whiskey, rock candy, honey, and lemon juice. Hot toddy whiskey with lemon, honey, and hot water. Sassafras tea made from boiling the roots of the tree. There are two kinds, red or white. Pinworms or bellyache. spoonful of sugar, and 3 drops of turpentine. When I was talking about liniment, that was the memory that was coming back to me. I knew used to know a boy, and he talked about in his family, they would take turpentine, and other people around us that day was like, well, you know, it's a wonder you didn't die. It's poison. But turpentine was used a lot. And I think Miss Cindy, my mother-in-law, has some stories about using turpentine as a child that they used, that was common as well. Constipation, senna leaves ground up with raisins or seeded prunes, castor oil, the dreaded castor oil. They laid me down and gave me juice with the oil and put a cold wet cloth on my throat to keep it down. And then chocolate X-Lax, of course, if any of you remember that. When we were young and we would stay at my mom and papa's, they had that in the refrigerator, and we always thought it was candy, you know. So there was always, it was like, do you dare to eat it because it's like candy, but then what's going to happen to you if you do? So stomach ache, lots of black pepper and coffee. See, I think that would kill my stomach, but that was one of the remedies. Bulls and sores, scrape raw potato and put in a white cloth, lay on top of the bulls and sores to draw out swelling and infections. Use on the eyes for styes. Spread egg whites on bulls to draw out infections. So before me and Matt were married, he was a welder. He went to welding school, and he was a welder for a construction firm out there where we lived in Haywood County. And one time his eyes got burned. Of course, he knew better, but sometimes when you're welding, there's just situations you can't really avoid. But that's what we did. The potato, squeezed out that stuff and put it in his eyes to help with the burned eyes being burned from welding. Measles and chicken pox, drink hot tea and cover with lots of quilts featherbed to make you hot and cause the measles and pox to break out. Then there's the spring tonics. I have a video about spring tonics. I'll link to that one. But take Epsom salts to clean out your system. In the spring, Mama would take me with her to help carry home the wild greens we fathered in the field next to our house. We found mullein leaves for poultices, wild cherry bark, and sassafras roots, white and red, for teas. We gathered new growing leaves from dandelion, blue thistle, wild mustard, dryland cress, new briar sprouts, and my favorite of all, poke. The fresh greens were mixed together and cooked, except for the poke. Mama would cook it by itself and then fry it with scrambled eggs, and that was submitted by Elaine, Neil, Morton, Butcher, all those were. So that's really interesting. So these I'm going to read now were submitted by Joanne Shields. Boneset tea from the leaves was used as a laxative, treatment of coughs and chest illnesses. Joe Pye weed was valuable for the leaves and roots used to induce sweating and to break a fever. I have Joe Pye weed all around my house. Tansy was used to calm nervous patients. Jack in pulpit was a treatment for coughs, tuberculosis, and rheumatism. I don't have any Jack in the pulpits right here where I'm at, but they do grow throughout Appalachia. Garlic was used to control worms in pets and people, toothache and asthma. Garlic was used for. Pokeweed was a cure for skin rashes, cancerous skin ulcers, swellings, and wounds. Butterfly weed was used internally for colic, hysteria, hemorrhage, gas, and weakness. Sunburn Relief, a wonderful relief for sunburn pain, is the application of mint-flavored milk of magnesia to the skin. That's interesting. I've never heard that. Dab on some apple cider vinegar for sunburn. The pinkness and pain will soon disappear. For super sunburn, put on a paste of water and baking soda. Never tried that one either. Tired eyes, place cold cucumber slices on your eyelids to rid them of redness and puffiness. I've seen people do that, like if they had cried a lot and they were trying to get their eyes to clear up. But I've never done that. Bee sting, put tobacco juice on the sting. This is a common theme with the tobacco. Poison ivy, 1 cup strong coffee mixed with 2 or 3 tablespoons of soda and 2 or 3 spoons of Epsom salts. Spread over poison oak on the skin and let dry. Repeat several times. I need to share that one with my brother Steve. He gets poison oak a lot. Basswood bark. Peel the bark and boil it. Strain for tea and add sugar to taste. Can be used for colds and flu. I don't think there's any basswoods right here where I'm at, but I've seen some really big, beautiful ones. One of the ones that come to mind, I have a picture of it somewhere with me in it, was over in the Indian Creek area or section of Swain County, just above Deep Creek. It was a really pretty one. Ginseng, the medical qualities are known to be a mild tonic, a stimulant for nerves, or for stomach aches. It is especially a remedy for ills to old age. For ills incident, it says, to old age. So I guess ginseng is especially good for old people, is what it's saying. So hiccups, you ever have the hiccups? I do, and I never have the hiccups that I don't have them multiple times in the same day. Like if I have them one time in the morning, I know before the day's out I'll have them again. And I think my record is having them 5 different times in the same day. So hiccups, put a brown paper bag over your nose and mouth and breathe in it until they stop. Take a teaspoon of peanut butter. I've also heard take a teaspoon or a tablespoon of sugar and eat that. Those were submitted, like I said, by Joanne Shields. To ward off the flu, drink a mixture of white corn liquor and honey to taste. Those are funny ones. They always make me smile. Ones about liquor. To draw pain out of an arthritic joint, tie a piece of pike root to the joint with a clean cloth. So I don't know what a pike root is. If you do, please tell me. To draw poison out of a bee sting, rub a little snuff on the swollen part. Give a little catnip tea to babies to cure colic and hives. To cure croup, give liberal dose of polecat grease. So you'd have to have some polecat grease on hand. And if you don't know what a polecat is a skunk. To cure the itch, rub infected parts with a mixture of sulfur and lard. To get rid of lice, cover head with a mixture of kerosene oil and olive oil. Wrap head with cloth for several hours, then wash oil out of hair. Lice cannot survive a soaking of kerosene. Yikes, I don't think anything could survive a soaking of kerosene. To cure worms, give tea made with vermifuge, it's vermifuge leaves and liberal dose of castor oil. To stop a cough, put a plaster on chest made with goose grease. So again, you'd have to have some goose grease on hand. To cure warts, rub castor oil on the wart morning and night, rubbing it 20 times. So I have a video about warts too, removing warts. I'll link to that below in the description. So those were remedies of Ova Sparks Cable Shore, and they were submitted by her daughter, Cricket Horn. This next one comes from Nancy Tipton Wright, and it was submitted by Inez McCauley Adams. So it's poison snake bite cure for dogs. Break jewelweed into small pieces, cook in milk, and strain and let the dog drink this. My Papa Wade had coon dogs, and I can remember seeing some of them when they got snake bit. They got over it, all the ones that I remember, but they would swell up something terrible, but then they would usually get over it. So this last one that I'm going to share is actually a recipe, it says of Nell Johnson, but it was submitted by Marie Johnson, and the name of it is Pappy's Recipe. So you need a handful of washed mullein. You need wild cherry bark cut off the north side of the tree, a handful of that, and you cook that in 1 quart of water for about 30 minutes, and then you strain it. Then you add 1 pint of moonshine and honey to taste, and then you cook that. Best cough medicine, it says, and this is only made in the fall of the year. So these are all so fascinating, and as I said, I'm not a doctor, and the people that Cades Cove Preservation Society that made the cookbooks, they're not trying to be doctors either. What they're trying to do is just show what our ancestors did to when they needed help, when there was no doctor around. They had to doctor themselves, which I have faith in a lot of these would probably work. I'm not saying they wouldn't, by no means. I wish I knew more about it though. Corey took a class several years back that was kind of a medicinal remedies type class at John C. Campbell Folk School, and she learned a lot. That's where we learned, I believe that's where we learned, and I totally forgot about that when I was talking about my experiences with medicinal remedies, is calendula flowers. We grow those, and Corey did it at first, I think. Katie kind of took it over, but we make a calendula oil out of them, and we put that on cuts and scrapes and burns and bruises, and it is amazing how good it works. Amazing. I didn't even think about that one. So maybe there's other medicinal remedies that I'm not thinking about. But some of them, if you don't want to mess with the plants or worry about, whether this plant's poison or whether it's not, those kind of things, some of the ones that are so simple, like gargling with warm salt water when you have a sore throat, that always helps me. That's one that I always do. So with that one, you're not taking any kind of risk, of course, because it's just salt water. But there's so many little ones like that that really will help us. That but I wish I knew more about the plant world. I wish I knew more about those to use. And maybe that's something I'll learn. Maybe that'll be one of my goals. But I hope you'll share any kind of home remedies, or your parents, if they had some, or your grandparents, or what they did, or any good resources for those of us like me that would like to learn more about it. Please share that in the comments. And please, as always, continue to drop back by and help me celebrate Appalachia.